try and do it this week so I can just stay focused on the workshop. So good afternoon, I'm Powell, I'm a children's author, and welcome to the third workshop on creative writing for children. To quickly summarise, this is a 6-week course designed to help children to improve their creative writing. In week 1, we covered characterisation, which is the process of creating characters. And last week, we covered settings, so how we can create an environment in which our stories are told. If you haven't watched either of those workshops, feel free to check out my Facebook page or YouTube channel. So this week, we're going to talk all about narrative and plot. I am going to give a shout out to people tuning in now. Apologies. TJ from Manchester, welcome. Saint Sanitizer, welcome. Finlay from Cooper, I think I've already welcomed you, but welcome again. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. So this is a 6-week course designed to help children to improve their creative writing. And this week we're going to talk about narrative and plot. So essentially we're going to bring together some of the concepts we talked about in characterisation and settings. So this session is going to be split into 2 areas, 2 parts. First is around plot, which is how we structure our stories. And then part 2, which will be towards the end, we'll spend just a few minutes on this. Towards the end is around narrative voice, where we'll explore how we can tell our stories and write our stories using different voices and in different ways. So let's focus on plot. So the plot in a story is essentially the structure. So it's kind of when, where, and how the story begins. It's how the story unfolds, and then how the story ends. And as I've said, each week, creative writing is all about expressing yourself. It's about expressing your thoughts, your feelings, your imagination, your ideas. And so it's about letting the words flow out onto paper. So we don't want to be too formulaic when we write. And by that, I mean we don't want to always kind of stick to the same structure every time we write a story. Otherwise, it would get a bit boring, a bit predictable. However, there are some key milestones that occur in a lot of stories which we can use as a guide. And I call them the 7 steps to story structure, which is catchy title, eh? So I'm now going to list the 7 steps, and then I'm going to talk in more detail about each of those steps. There will be a fun activity for each of the steps that we can build on as we work our way through. So get ready for the comments. Hello Shyle from Nottingham. Hello Noah from Erith. Hello Emma from Orpington. Hello from Earth, Mandy. Bethan and Katie in Chelmsford. Lisa and Agnes from Hoddesdon. Welcome. Aleko from Cricklewood. Faith from Hertfordshire too. Oscar from Chesterfield. Chloe from Huntingdon. Eon from Belfast. Evie in Manchester, Maddie from Kingston. Fantastic. Sorry, just doing some welcomes. I don't want to leave anyone out. Thank you everyone for tuning in. So the first part of the workshop today is going to be about these 7 steps, 7 milestones that we can include in our stories. And we can use this as a framework so we can structure our stories. So the narrative flows, we keep the reader engaged, everything kind of makes sense and fits together. So this is what we're going to focus on mainly in today's session. So the 7 steps, I'm going to read them out now, and then I'm going to talk in more detail about each of them. So number 1 is introduction. Number 2 is incident. Number 3 is action. Number 4 is adventure. Number 5 is setback. Number 6 is salvage. And number 7 is finale. So that's 7 occurrences, 7 milestones, 7 parts of a story that we can include and use as a framework when we're structuring our stories. So let's start with number 1, the introduction. So this is the beginning of our story. This is where we can introduce the lead character. This is where we kind of inform the reader a little bit about the character's life. And what we want to instill here is some sense of normality. You know, what is life like for our characters on a kind of day-to-day basis? What does normal look like? Because there will be a point in your story where something happens, which will change your character's situation or life. So what we want to achieve here is some sense of normality. And then later on in the story, when something does happen, the reader has some contrast, so they can see how this incident has impacted the character's life. We can also draw upon some of the concepts we talked about in settings. We can describe the setting, the environment, where the story is based. So that could be a town, a village, a community, a street, a country, a planet. And also building on, some of what we discussed in characterization. We can just tell the reader a little bit about our character. We can describe them. We can tell the reader what is our character's role within the world that we've created. So we describe the world, we describe the characters and how our character fits into that world. In terms of length for this part of the story, we want this to be pretty short and concise. If we're writing a 1,000-word story, I would say the introduction part is probably 50 to 100 words maximum, because we want to get straight into the action and the drama, and we want to keep the reader engaged and excited. So that's the introduction. We've set the scene, introduced the characters, and we've kind of instilled a sense of normality. So activity part 1, please can you, off the top of your heads, come up with a character, a location, and a time that your story could be set in. So it could be an animal, a human, an object. So think of a name for a character, and then a location. So last week, my location was a seaside town, and then I decided to set that in the future. If you can write that in the comment section, fantastic. If you're watching this after the event, after the live stream, you can do it just on some paper. And so this is going to be a 7-part activity. And by the end of it, you will have created 7 kind of headlines, 7 milestones in a story that you can then build upon. Fantastic. So they're starting to come through now. So keep them coming through. And we're going to come back to those at each of these steps that we talk about. So that's step 1, introduction. Step 2, we call incident. So this is where something happens in our story. It starts a chain of events that drives the plot forwards. So it could be an event. It could be that something happens to the character. It could be that they find something out. It could be something good, something bad, something strange, weird, mysterious. But essentially, it changes our character's situation or life or existence. And because we've kind of introduced the character and the settings pretty quickly, we're now getting into the kind of the real juice of the story. So the reader now is familiar with the character. They may have some empathy with the character, familiar with the environment, and now something has happened pretty quickly. So hopefully the reader of our story is engaged so far. It's at this point as well that we can also think about introducing or start to kind of put some ideas down for potentially a subplot. So for some of the older children tuning in, this is definitely something you can think about. So a subplot is kind of like a mini story that runs alongside the main plot. So it could involve one of the other characters in the story, or it could be a smaller scale event that occurs. But basically a subplot kind of runs alongside the main plot. And now is a good time in the story to start kind of feeding into that. Hopefully that all makes sense so far. So activity part 2, I would like you to go back to your first part of the activity where you've came up with a character name, a location, and when the story has taken place. Now I would like you to make up an incident that changes your character's situation or life. Ideally, if you can go back to your original comment and reply to it, so you've got a chain, but no worries if you can't find it. So now we want to think about what could happen in our story that could impact our character's existence. Fantastic. So they're coming through right now. Excellent. So far in our story, we've introduced the characters, the setting, the environment, and something has happened. Something that has changed our character's situation and existence. For part 3, for section 3, we call this action. So now this is where our lead character decides to act, to do something in reaction to the incident that has happened. So let's give a very kind of simple example. So my character, Tony, welcome back, Tony. Let's just say Tony, his neighbour who he gets on really well with, her dog has disappeared. Her dog has went missing. So that would be the incident. The action would be that Tony decides, because he loves his neighbour so much, that he makes it his mission to find the missing dog. So that would be the action. So it's often the case that whatever the action is, the lead character often becomes absorbed in this quest. It becomes their mission, their purpose. They're determined to right the wrong, to seek justice, to solve the mystery. They're determined just to kind of do whatever it takes to get to the bottom of whatever it is they're trying to achieve. So again, this is a critical milestone in a story that builds on the incident. So as you can see, what we've done so far is we've introduced the characters, the setting, the environment, and then we've had an incident, and now our character has decided to kind of act, to do something in reaction to that incident. This is also at the point, again, building on some of the concepts in characterization workshop, where we may well start to see some changes in our lead character. So, our lead character might now start to, be a little bit more confident or stronger or more determined. They may meet new people or make new friends, but this is the start of where our character and characters will evolve and change throughout the story as the story progresses. And again, our job as an author is to kind of document that throughout the story, and so the reader kind of follows that journey of the characters, of how they develop and progress throughout that story. At this point, in terms of length, so if we're writing a 1,000 word story, I would say at this point we would be about 250 or 300 words. And so we haven't really got into the kind of main part of the story yet. So the first 3 parts I would keep to 250, 300 words in a 1,000 word story. Step 4, moving on, we call this adventure. Now this is where our lead character, he or she comes across all sorts of situations and experiences and challenges in their mission. So they've decided that something has happened, the incident, they've decided to act, and now they go on this journey to kind of achieve whatever they set out to achieve. So they may kind of be in dangerous or scary situations. They may uncover secrets. They may kind of meet new people, make new friends, make some enemies. This is a large chunk of the story. So this is, I would say, about a third of the story. So a 1,000 word story, this part is about 300 words. And again, this is going to be quite fast paced. So the character is going to be kind of doing everything they can to kind of get to the bottom of whatever it is they're trying to achieve. Again, going back to the settings workshop, in this part of the story, we may move around different locations quite often. So again, we've got to make sure that the reader is up to date with where the story is currently taking place. But at this point, once we get to the end of stage 4 in our story, we're at the halfway point or just over. So we're maybe 500 or 600 words into our 1,000 word story. And again, we don't need to be too rigid with this structure, but it's just meant to be used as a guide so you can see how your story fits together. So now, activity part 4. In fact, I think I missed activity part 3, which was what your character could do, what the action would be. So what is the incident, and what would their action be? So if you can come up with that and write it in the comment section. And so activity part 4 is, what would the 3 challenges your character could face? So could it be that they're put in a dangerous, life-threatening situation, or they come into contact with a monster or someone with secret powers, or whatever it may be. We want to have some challenges, some hurdles. So our character has to face adversity. Our character has to come outside of their comfort zone, and they have to do things generally which they've never done before. And again, we create these moments in our stories which build drama, build action, and take our readers on that journey with us. So think about these for the activity. Lots of questions coming in there about the 1,000 word story. I will address these right at the end. Thank you. But fantastic. Keep those comments coming through. If you're watching this again after the live stream, you can do this activity on some paper. And the aim, and I'll explain more towards the end, is you will have 7 kind of milestones of a story that you can then build on. So we've introduced the characters in the first part of the story. We've introduced the setting, the environment in which they exist. Then we've had an incident which has changed our character's situation or life. Then we've had action, where our character has decided to act, to do something in reaction to the incident. And then we've had adventure. This is where a big part of the story, where our character goes on this crazy mission to achieve whatever they set out to achieve. Then there comes a point in a lot of stories where and I call this setback. So this is step 5, setback, where it seems everything is lost, where something happens which kind of derails the lead character's mission, like the quest is out of reach, where hope slips away. So again, this could be an event. It could be that they find out something from another character or a friend. And it makes their mission seemingly impossible. This is a point in the story where we're kind of starting to take the reader on a bit of a roller coaster ride. So we're seeing the ups and downs of the character, the ups and downs as the plot flows. But also this is a part where you could potentially, if you wanted to, introduce an early twist. So maybe another character in the story who is the best friend of the lead character could turn out to be not very pleasant, and might be doing something bad towards the lead character. But the setback, this section, is where so far the character's made so much progress. They've decided to act. They've went on this mission. They've been through all of these different experiences. Then all of a sudden something happens which is a real setback. And so we're taking the reader on that journey with us. Part 5 of the activity. So think of a setback. What event or what could happen that could place doubt on your character's mission? I'm loving reading all of these comments here. Fantastic. I'm going to read all of them after, probably tonight, but really fantastic. Again, the purpose of this activity is just to demonstrate that you can quickly come up with ideas and build on them very quickly. And I appreciate, some of it may be gobbledygook because you're coming up with things instinctively. But this is how we can kind of writing things down generates ideas, and ideas generate concepts, and then concepts generate stories. So this is always a good exercise, again, to do just to get the creative juices flowing. Right, so far, and I keep repeating myself, but I think it's important. So far, we've had the introduction, we've introduced the characters, the setting, the environment, the world in which they exist. Then we've had an incident, which has changed the environment and changed the situation for our characters. Then we've had action, part 3, where our characters have decided to do something in reaction to the incident. And then we've had adventure, where our character has been on this huge mission in their quest to achieve whatever they set out to achieve. And now we've just had a setback where it seems like everything is lost, our character is struggling, things seem out of reach, and the mission seems slightly more challenging at this stage. Then we come to point 6, which starts to tee up the grand finale of the story. So point 6, step 6, I should say, is what we call salvage. This is the part of the story where the lead character finds something within, that's something extra that they have this renewed sense of hope, ambition, drive. They may have a moment of inspiration. They may speak to someone who inspires them to try even harder or to try a different way. But essentially, this is where, we've just had this setback. This is where the lead character turns things around through some kind of event, occurrence, or interaction with another character. Activity part 6. How could your character turn things around? What could they do? Who could they speak to? What information could they find out? What could it be? What could be the salvage moment in your story? Fantastic. And again, if you're watching this after the live stream, please do this activity on some paper. It's a very useful activity. Again, we're working on instinct. A lot of the activities we've done in each of these workshops is where we're just kind of making stuff up off the top of our heads and writing it down. And that's what we've always got to do when we have ideas. We've got to write them down, and then they're there. They won't get lost in our heads because our brains are working a million miles an hour, and ideas can quickly come and then they can very quickly disappear. So we have an idea, we write it down, and we can always then build on these ideas on forwards. Fantastic. So now we come to the final point of the story, and we call this the finale. So this is the end of the story. This is where we try and bring everything together, where we try and fit all of the pieces of the plot into a nice, smart jigsaw. Ending a story is difficult. It's arguably the most challenging part of writing a story. I've actually read a number of interviews with famous authors where some of them have said that, once they have a concept for a book, that they often will write the end first and then work backwards, which is quite interesting. Whatever way you choose to write, you will develop your own system, your own way of writing, and the only way you could do that is through practice. If you love writing and you're passionate about writing stories, then just continue to write, practice, and you will develop your own style and your own way of doing things. But writing the end of a story isn't easy, because we want to give the reader a sense of satisfaction. That we want to be able to, at this point of the story, we've took the reader on this journey with us, with the characters, through the plot, through all of these adventures, and we don't want to let them down right at the end with an ending which doesn't quite fit or make sense. But at the same time, we don't want everything to be too obvious as well when we try and end the story. So we've got to strike a very difficult balance between trying to please the reader and also not making it too obvious and too formulaic. So having something unexpected happen at the end is good. Maybe a twist, maybe one of the other characters turns out to be something different, or maybe something happens which changes again the kind of situation for the lead character. But essentially having something unexpected at the end of the story, which obviously has to make sense within the plot, is a good thing. So it's not an easy thing to achieve. If you get to this point of writing your story and you think, wow, I've got so many ideas, I could actually write another story about this. This could be a sequel, a trilogy, a series. So you could, if you get to that point, that would be fantastic. You could actually leave something open. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the end of the story, but you could leave some questions unanswered within the plot, which you can then build on in a future story, which links to this. So, activity part 7 for the finale, how could, and this is difficult for you to do, but in the comment section, how could you wrap the story up? What could happen which could kind of fit the jigsaw together? What would make sense from the story that you have just created in the matter of a few minutes? And again, if you're doing this after the live stream, you can write this down on paper. So this 7-part activity is to demonstrate just how quickly, again, you can come up with ideas and you can build on them. So what I hope you will have at the end of that is just 7 sentences, which are kind of like a skeleton of a story. And then if we want to put some flesh on the bones, so to speak, we can then start to build out on each of those 7 sentences that we've created. So that is what I would say is a framework for writing stories. Those 7 steps. To recap, we have introduction, where we introduce the characters, the setting, the environment. Then we have incident, where something happens early on in the story which changes our character's world and their friends or their environment. Then we have action, where our character kind of decides to do something. They become absorbed in this mission to right the wrong or to seek justice or to solve the mystery. Then we have step 4, adventure, where our character goes on this crazy adventure and experiences things they've never experienced before in their mission. Then we have step 5, setback, where something happens to them or they find something out which kind of puts a spanner in the works, which makes it more difficult. And then we have step 6, which is salvage, where the character finds this inner strength or this moment of inspiration where they can turn things around. And then finally, we have finale, where we kind of wrap the story up. We conclude the story, the plot, we bring things together, we answer those unanswered questions, but at the same time, we want to have something unexpected in there. It all sounds very easy when you kind of spell it out like that, but writing isn't easy. So the only way you can improve your writing is through practice, is through writing your ideas down as soon as they pop into your head. And just the most important thing is just to enjoy it. As I said in the first and second workshops, and I'm going to say it again today, and I will say it again in future weeks, creative writing should be all about fun and enjoyment, and you should do it purely as something for you, something for you to enjoy, and not worry about what other people think about your writing. So a good exercise that you can do for your 1,000 word stories and for any story that you write is to apply those 7 steps to your story. So just read your story and think about where each section would fit into those 7 steps. So a bit like a framework, and you'll find that it may kind of fit quite nicely, or you may find that, for example, you may have your introduction part is a bit too long, so you might want to cut that down. And what we want in our stories, we want to tell the story through action, drama, the characters, so we want it to be fairly fast-paced, to keep the reader turning the page, to keep them excited and engaged. Again, it's not an easy thing to do, but applying a framework like this can definitely help. I had a few messages from some parents around how you can shorten your writing. So some of the 1,000 word stories, I believe, are kind of 1,200, 300. I think it's fine to go to 1,100 so to speak. But there is a skill in trying to convey your story, your message, and the story itself in a limited word count. So if you can apply this framework, these 7 steps to your 1,000 word story, you might be able to cut out things that you've included which aren't that important really, or that aren't that relevant, or don't really make that much sense in the broader context of the plot. I hope all of that makes sense. We're nearly out of time. I was going to cover very quickly narrative voice, different types of narrative voice. This is quite technical, I guess, and I think for younger children who are tuning in, I wouldn't worry at all and think about this just yet. It's something that you can think about as you get a bit older and you develop your writing further. For some of the older children who are tuning in, it is something you can think about, and I'll cover it very quickly right now, but I think I will incorporate this into one of the future workshops. So narrative voice is basically how the story is told, and the 2 most common, I would say, in children's books, the 2 most common narrative voices used is first person and third person. So first person is where the story is told from the perspective of a character. So what the character can see, what the character feels, what the character can touch, who they talk to, what they do and what they think. So it's kind of all about I, and it's told through the lens of a particular character in a book, in your story. Whereas third person, and I assume a lot of your stories that you're writing, both my books are told in third person. They're not told from a character's perspective, they're told from third person, which means that the story is told from someone outside of the story. So the story is not through the lens of a character in the story, it's from someone outside, which is kind of the author. So you're using things like he, she, them, they, rather than I and we. I hope that makes sense. We can cover that in a future workshop, but it's definitely something for some of you older children who are tuning in. It's something that you can think about, because sometimes we can give our stories a bit more atmosphere, a bit more drama if they're told through a character rather than this kind of third person voice. So we're out of time now. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Fantastic, especially on this beautiful sunny day. Hugely appreciated. Before we finish, as I've noticed quite a few questions on the Rainbow Writing Competition. It's on the event page. I did a post on the event page with all of the details. So have a look. I'll put it as a pinned post later tonight on the event page. But just to summarize, 1,000 word story. If for younger children, don't worry about the 1,000 words, and it can be 500, 250, whatever you feel comfortable with. The deadline to submit is Wednesday, the 6th of May, and you can submit your stories to me via email. My email address is on the post. It's rpowellauthor@outlook.com. And then I will review all of the stories, and the winner, off the top of my head, the winners will be announced on Wednesday, the 26th of May, 3 p.m. live on Facebook. So I've forgotten something. There's different age categories for the Rainbow Writing Competition as well for children of different ages. So it's a fair competition. And also the prizes are my books, basically. Signed copies with personalised messages of my books. And also my next book, Odd Socks Make Socks Feel Great Again, is out in a couple of months, so you will get a signed copy of that. And if possible and practical, I would be delighted to visit the winners' schools to do a kind of talk in assembly. I would love to do that as well, but we can arrange that with the winners at some point. But for now, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of the day. Enjoy Easter. And stay safe, stay well, and I hope to see you next week when we're going to cover dialogue in a story, which is essentially how characters interact with one another and how they talk and how they move and act. So fantastic. Thank you so much. Take care. Stay safe. See you next week. Thank you. Bye bye. Bye bye.